Hello and welcome to a special episode of L&D Disrupt. I'm excited for you to hear this conversation today because we're doing something a little bit different. And that is, I'm being joined by someone from outside the people development L&D or HR space. Our guest is Matt Laybourn, the founder of Rockee. Rockee is a platform that helps companies measure the performance of their content in real time and gain insights into that content from the people using it, ultimately allowing them to improve their content and what they do moving forward. Now, from my conversations with a lot of L&D professionals, I understand that getting insights into how the company perceives L&D and how your content performs can be a challenge. And that's why I wanted to have Matt on the show to talk us through the fundamentals of collecting feedback we can use. We also talked about why the timing of when we collect feedback matters, the importance of having a feedback strategy, the importance of using that strategy and building it before we roll out feedback surveys and take action, and also using feedback to tell great stories to the rest of the business. You'll hear a little bit about who Matt is at the start and throughout the episode, but if you'd like to connect with him or learn more about Rockee, you'll find both of those links in the description, as well as a link to his podcast, The Sausage Factory. But that's it for me, so I hope you enjoy this conversation with Matt Laybourn. So, Matt, really glad to have you on the show today. I think you're probably the first person we've had on from outside a traditional L&D HR space, so I'm really excited to get that outsider perspective, especially because from my conversations with L&D pros, I know they can struggle to collect feedback they can use, and you essentially have founded a platform and a company that's all about collecting feedback you can use. So I'd love for people to hear a bit about who you are, what Rockee is, and what inspired you to build it.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I'll be honest, I sort of fell into the world of feedback. It wasn't the weird intention I had as a kid growing up, where it's like you're going to collect feedback from stakeholders as you grow up and use it to make better things. That wasn't the dream. But so my background is in marketing. I used to lead a digital performance team at TMW. So like a reasonably sized team. We dealt with a lot of big B2B clients, especially around content marketing. And basically we just kept finding the same problem, and it was getting too annoying to like not do something about it. So the problem we've got with content marketing is we make lots and lots of it. It's huge as an industry, as everyone will know. And then when we assess how effective it was, we look in the dashboard and we look at numbers. So we'll look at things like a dwell time, a bounce rate, an engagement rate, and we guess how effective that was. And that's a consistent thing that we've found across all of the marketing people that I've spoken to. So we found a problem, and our hypothesis originally was there must be a better way, and we think the better way is we need to actually get feedback and understand whether content resonates, whether it's doing its job. So that was how Rockee was born. It's a content feedback platform which collects feedback from your audience on your content, but also brings in the analytics data that you know and perhaps love. It's obviously dependent on your own personal preference, but that's how we got to where we are. So thanks for having me on.
No worries. Yeah, I can completely relate. It's so easy to get caught up in vanity metrics in marketing, but I feel like there's a crossover to L&D and HR because I've seen some research on that people are necessarily, like you say, looking at things like the time spent on content rather than the impact it has, or how many times it was opened isn't the only indicator of how useful something is. So I'm glad we're going to bridge the market into L&D problem here, and maybe we'll solve it for both audiences. You never know.
Let's hope.
Yes. So the first thing is, well, like I said, I know this is a problem for L&D, feedback that can create useful action. And normally I see it's a case of they're either collecting too much feedback and it's that paralysis by analysis type thing, or we're not necessarily asking the right questions to get useful feedback we can then use. So just on a broad level, what are some of the basics of collecting feedback that then you could use later to take action, be more impactful in your business?
You hit on one of the big problems we have. First of all, is like, especially in a bigger company, like designing a survey or feedback mechanism by group ends up in a big long survey, which you can just look at the stats of the drop off rate, and you just be like, look, 90% did the first question, and then down to 70, 40, 20, 10, and you've got a broken data sample straight away. So it's a huge problem. So the biggest thing I'd say, first of all, is you need to be concise. need to know exactly what you want in terms of feedback out of that particular reader. So the biggest thing that I would always look to do with any type of content is, are you serving on user intent? So is the title of your content like, I don't know, 7 tips on how to do, I don't know, improve a process, let's say, something like that. Okay, you've set up what you're giving the audience. You've given them an expectation, and one of the first questions you should ask is, have we delivered on the thing that we said we were going to do? And it can be simple as yes or no. Do not overcomplicate it. But this is where you can be quite smart with using really quick fire, like heat. I call it heat. I watch too much basketball, so I call everything a heat check. But it's kind of a heat check. Like, have we done the job? Great, yes or no. If it says yes, and they've given you a rating of like 5 out of 5, for example, that's fine. You haven't got much to learn from that. But if someone says, "Well, no, you haven't done what you said you were going to do," that's where you can start to bring in other types of questions, bring in qualitative. And I would only do qualitative maybe only once in a whole survey, just as making sure you're understanding what the problem is and how you can go and solve it. So if you haven't met the user intent, find out why, no, and you can go, it might be X, Y, or Z. And that's where the real gold is. The gold is not in 17 different like quantitative questions where you end up guessing even more how good the content is afterwards. The gold is setting up what the problem is, trying to find it really quickly, and then finding out the why behind it. And that's where you can go and make better content. You can improve on that particular process.
Yeah. There's 2 things I love in there. One is something I don't think about often enough either, the drop-off point. So we'll often look at how many people completed a survey or took part in a survey. But like you said, we don't know how many people dropped off. So we're skewing our own data sample perhaps by not going further enough into that data to say, well, actually, after the 10th question, 50% of people dropped out. So the second half of your survey isn't necessarily indicative of the whole group that you're surveying.
Yeah, it's so important to have a reliable survey set, and you kind of need to get good levels of consistencies, which means you do need volume with some types of questions. If you ask 100 people the same question and you start to see a particular trend where you're not solving a problem, whatever it may be, then you've got something to go on. You've got a leading indicator, and that's when you bring in again the qual and go, why is everyone saying they don't? Why have we not solved the problem from this one quant question? But if you've only got 2 responses, ignore it. It's not relevant yet. You need a statistically significant number to start making good decisions. Otherwise, you're kind of doing a knee-jerk decision, and it's not effective.
Yeah, I think one of the pitfalls a lot of the time for people is recency bias. And if you've got such a small data sample, then you will confirm your biases as well, because you'll just go, well, 2 people said this. It kind of confirms what I thought, what I've heard recently. But like you say, statistically significant is like a minimum requirement, I guess.
Yeah, that's another really good point. Is you've kind of removed the bias of what you're expecting out of the survey as well.
Yeah.
So if a couple of results look the way you want them to, you can't just get throw all your eggs in that basket. So
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I think I always try and get other people to look at any survey I'm sending out, because it's hard not to write leading questions. Let's be honest. Like we all can be self-aware to a point, but are you self-aware enough to go, look, I'm trying to shoehorn this down this particular angle? So I guess like getting that external validation would help you with your biases. I guess the other thing you said there as well that I really liked was the framing. And I think sometimes mistrust can happen when you are misrepresenting what a piece of content is meant to do. And I especially think in a business where you're pitching content as a solution to a problem, if it doesn't solve the problem you say it's going to, you not only have this piece of content that's not that useful, you have problems like mistrust in your content overall, perception that it's not particularly useful. Because like you said, if it was 7 ways to improve this process or the step-by-step principles of uploading someone to our system, and it isn't clear enough for you to upload someone to the system, will you go back to the content later, or will you maybe just go, can you spend 5 minutes running through this with me to someone else in the team who knows how to do it, so you don't end up having to use this content you think won't help you because it's not framed the right way. So I love that point as well.
There's a situation I'm going through at the moment where I'm onboarding, like in some other work I'm doing, I'm onboarding a client into a particular platform, and I'm literally going through a help center which is doing that exact job. It's like, here's how to set up X, and you're like, okay, that's great. And there's certain bits of it where I get to, I'm like, okay, it's not clear what I'm supposed to do next. So I'm constantly reaching out to the customer service representative and I'm going, look, your guide isn't doing the job. They've even got a widget, ironically, which is like, what's your emoji rating like
Mm,
of this content? I
yeah.
just keep clicking on sad because like I'm sad, I can't do the job. And you have not given me a mechanism to actually feedback as to why. You're just getting lots of sad smiley faces, which is
Yeah.
completely useless as a data point. But you're creating process, you're creating like time wasted for someone else to go, okay, how do I, here's how to do it. I'll screen share it. I'll jump on a meeting. And that's, it's money. That's costing you money to be doing that all the time by not being effective with that piece of content. So yeah, still a very big problem.
Yeah. I guess as well, you made me think when you're collecting it as in an emoji, it's part of that process of asking yourself, well, what now? Like, for example, if I get 100 sad faces, what now? Like, what am I meant to do with 100 sad faces? Like, can I actually, what would be the next step? Like you said, I don't know why any of those people are sad. So how do I funnel? And we maybe make a mistake, I guess, if we're not like particularly au fait with surveys or things like this, that we might say it's low friction for our audience to just do a sad face, but also it's not useful to us necessarily. So how can we improve the overall long-term experience for the person who's at the end of the sad faces?
Yeah, there's something I forgot to add there in terms of qualification. So like it's always good to start with a rating at the very beginning. Like, how did you rate this content? Has it served its purpose? Like it could be 5 stars, yes or no, however you want to do it. That's great. The second thing I actually do before getting to qual is depending on the data that survey is collecting, I would also try and qualify your audience because sometimes the feedback is irrelevant. I'll give you an example. We have a user on our platform who actually disqualifies nearly 50% of their responses because they have a huge amount of people come to their site who are students. They're not the type, they're trying to sell to B2B, ironically, HR, tech professionals, but they have loads of students go on there because they're trying to study for a dissertation or something like that. And they give loads of feedback on the content. He's like, I don't want to see that. I don't care what they think.
Yeah.
It's not relevant. But also, in a more serious sense, like even if you're qualifying like levels of seniority with content, you might have someone really senior who gets high level principles and understands it. But will, and at the same time, someone lower down in the, might be entry level, just simply doesn't understand that content. And it's making sure you're pitching the content to the right audience. Feedback is relevant as well, because sometimes, like, you don't want to go and rewrite a piece of content because junior stakeholders don't understand it, but it wasn't for them. It's not, it's not relevant. So there's a good way of, again, qualification and making sure you're blending quant and qual to get the right types of response.
Yeah. And I guess internally in a business, that would come down to doing some sort of segmentation, like who, like you say, whose feedback is useful on this particular thing. So, if we want to know what sentiment is towards leadership in the business, we don't want to blanket roll it out to everyone. And by the same token, if we want to know what the perception of marketing is, for example, including the marketing people in the survey is only going to skew the data, right? So I guess it's about internally, how do I segment my surveys so I get statistically significant but relevant feedback from enough people in the right position, the right stage of their time in the company, and all those things. Yeah, I love that. And then I guess as well, you made me think there, that example of you're trying to add it to the system, the heart emoji isn't great, you have to jump on the call with someone. And then I guess what's maybe missing in that process is the feedback you're sharing on that call with the person. Is that getting fed back into the content that you tried to access in the first place? So the overall question really is, I guess because L&D teams are also creating a lot of content, when you get that feedback, what is a useful way to convert feedback into improved content? Any tips on that?
Yeah. As a guiding light at the very beginning, I would always focus on, funnily enough, quantitative data to start to build, going back to that statistical significance. So depending on the volume of people you're sending this content out to, the volume of responses you'll start to see trends. So you might see certain types of content consistently ranked highly, and you're like, okay, that's great. I don't have to prioritize that now in terms of optimization. What it does tell me for future planning though is these things, some of this stuff is really effective. This could inform our next process, our next campaign, our next, set of documents, whatever it may be. You want to keep your eye on the ones that are consistently being ranked lower. So you're getting, I don't know, a 3 out of 5, 2 out of 5. You haven't met the intent of the user. Once you've started to get a bit of a bank of consistency with that, you're like, okay, now it's time to dig into that. So are we seeing particular audiences within that sample who aren't having a good experience? Is it a trend towards a department, a level of seniority? That's great. And then that's where the qual gets really interesting because you can go, okay, I've narrowed it down to, I don't know, HR not having a good time with this content. And the feedback is, I don't know, the terminology is not right. It's not something that we understand or, whatever it may be. That's where you've got, really clear, simple process as to what to go and do with it. But the biggest thing is getting set up in the first place and not just jumping into it and making decisions in the first week or two. You just need to be collecting a big sample size so you can build confidence in what you're doing next.
Do you think that's a bit of a pitfall for people, the rush to collect? Like I need to have this survey finished by the end of the week. So therefore you maybe don't get the sample size you want and you also get people rush into feedback. So maybe part of it is setting more realistic timeframes to complete surveys or feedback because the ultimate thing is the quality of the information, not necessarily when it's completed, I guess.
Yeah, and there's a real big thing there in terms of changing the behavior of how you manage that as a process. So there's so many different survey types. You could do, your quarterly, you could do your annual, and you've got pros and cons of every method. You've got recency bias with doing an annual survey and someone just got told off by their boss the previous week. Yeah, it's a bad result, but they could have had a great 11 months prior to that. So you've got pros and cons of everything, but it's making sure you've got a really good process where you might have big samples that you collect over a regular, like quarterly or annually, but then you're constantly topping up with smaller things where you might be focusing on particular problems or just having a really good way of collecting data continuously. I know sometimes it can sound like it's frustrating for the end user, but there is simply no other way of learning, and you have to try and make it a good experience for them as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting advice actually, because I think it applies to more than just content, especially in the sort of people world, because performance reviews are often skewed by what's happened in the months leading up to them. So are you also collecting feedback that gives you a more well-rounded picture of how someone's performing in a company across the state of the year? Like I know you're a football fan as well, but if you have a good start to the season and a bad end, people forget about the good start. If you start the season badly and end well, people remember that. And it's about what you do in that final period. So I guess, yeah, thinking about this now, it applies to a wider context of people performance as well, how you collect feedback.
It's the phrase is you're only as good as your last game, and
Yeah, yeah,
being a fan of my particular team, my last game is always generally quite bad. So there's a consistency there, but I don't think that applies to most teams.
yeah, yeah. No, exactly. No, that's fair. Yeah, I guess as well, it's low hanging fruit maybe is a good place for people to start. If they've got a lot of content, I know people listening to this will have a big bank of content, and it's not just about the new content you're going to create. It's about optimizing and finding out which content does perform well. So yeah, I really like this idea of the audit, starting with maybe what actually was useful to you and then digging into what was useful and why, and then looking for the repeat offenders where people were saying, look, this isn't useful. If it's still relevant to a business case or a business issue or business problem, then you probably need some content on that issue. But if it's being flagged as something that doesn't work, that's your low hanging fruit to say, let's improve these ones that are being the biggest, like the 80-20 rule. I bet like 80% of the most frustrated feedback is 20% of the resources. So maybe tackling those is a better way to start shifting the culture, I guess.
And the interesting thing is, most companies' content is there's generally maybe only like 15 to 20% of it. Again, that same rule that is being consistently read. That's got high volumes. It's got high levels of engagement. And then there's loads of other content you've created on niche areas, which perhaps you don't need to focus on just now. You can kind of pick those up in the longer term, but you can build a really relevant sample size on your high impact content in a very small period of time because you've got a lot of people going towards it anyway.
Yeah, yeah, no, I feel that very much because every content marketer or copywriter will know like most of your traffic or page views will come from a small amount of pages, and actually it can even get to the point where you go, I'm just going to delete a lot of the content I've created because it's no longer useful, it's no longer being found, it's adding clutter to when people are trying to find the stuff that does get traffic. So I think a similar mindset of ruthlessness could also be useful to people in the L&D space. Like you said, if content isn't being used or found and there's a reason it's not being found, is there any benefit to still having it if it kind of clogs up this needle in a haystack approach of looking for the content you need? So
Yeah,
I like
yeah.
that. The other question, and I think this really fits into what Rockee does because it's about collecting feedback in real time. But one of the things I've heard and noticed is when we collect feedback really matters within organizations. And it's a hurdle because if we don't collect it at the right time, we might not be able to use it as effectively. So the best example someone gave me is that typically during the onboarding period, we'll collect feedback throughout the onboarding perhaps, but certainly at the end of the 3 or 6 months. What happens is we lose all the feedback mechanisms for when someone's actually in the job. And the point of onboarding is to prepare someone to perform their job. So we lose the feedback of saying, now you're in the job, did all the content we gave to you during onboarding actually prepare you to do your job better? And I think that point matters. And I guess as well, like from a content perspective, we'll often send surveys about how useful was this course or piece of content, but detached from the moment someone is actually trying to use it or apply it to solve a problem. So I guess generally your thoughts on why when you collect feedback matters, but particularly the real-time insights, I think people would be really great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's. I obviously have a personal preference for real time for the type of content we do. Like we have a lot of, for example, people who use it for SEO purposes. Like I've landed on a page, you promised me you were going to deliver me X, and we're trying to capture have we delivered on that intent really quickly. The main problem we've got if we don't do a real time survey is we are all bombarded more than ever by comms from every single angle. We're advertised more than we've ever been in the history of mankind. At any one time, I might accidentally pick up my phone and go on 2 or 3 social networks. I'll quickly go onto LinkedIn. I've got emails pinging. I've got Slack pinging. Like I've got an incoming call, and you're like, I've got so many comms happening to me. It could be even a 30-minute window from when you completed that course that you've been given by your L&D team to 30 minutes later. You're like, hang on a minute, what was that about again? Did it solve the problem? Then you've got to go back into your memory, and our memories have always been the same. Like we've evolved a bit, but we're not perfect.
Yeah.
And it's memory loss. Like it's not saying it as a bad thing, but there's too much going on. We simply cannot remember unless we're collecting things in real time. And again, you're just breaking the data. And if you start sending out surveys on something that happened, the longer the time frame it is, the worse their data will be, and you'll make decisions which simply don't work. Whereas if you're collecting in real time, you can get kind of real visceral responses. If the thing was frustrating, it was hard to do, someone will go, "Oh, this was hard. I didn't understand it," and you're like, "Okay, great, thank you. Like, how can we improve on that?" And at the same time, for measurement and internal teams, like if you are really landing it and going, "Yeah, I'm ready. I can't wait to do the job. Like, I completely got the training. This was a really good course. Brilliant. Like, you're good to go." So there's huge benefit of it, and it's simply just because we're inundated with other stuff at the moment. We have to try and get those responses as quick as we can.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think you hit on two great points there. The sample size will diminish because, like you said, unless we capture it natively, I go back to my day. Let's say 100 people went to this resource, and optimistically, the average open rate of an email is 20-ish%. And let's say 5% of those people click through. We already see how small the sample size could be versus collecting it in real time. And then, like you said, the quality of the data, can it be trusted if it's someone half remembering a course they did, but they don't really remember the ins and outs of it? And how useful can that be in improving what I do? And yeah, it's interesting. We have a similar feature within some of our content in How Now where people can rank how useful it was in real time. And I think that is such a benefit to people because they, like you said, they can get a real insight of the person. And you mentioned intent earlier as well, actually. It's in that moment of intent. So if I go to find a piece of content, it's because I'm trying to solve a problem. So my mindset is this, the intent is to solve the problem, and I'm most invested in the problem at that time. So I'll give you the best feedback, I'd imagine. Whereas later, I'm not trying to solve the problem anymore. I might have found a different way to do it. So the type of feedback you'll get will be completely different.
Yeah, yeah, completely
Yeah.
agree.
I also think sometimes there's a challenge with giving people the tools to give feedback usefully. So someone gave me a great lesson on this a while ago, but if we say our feedback culture is not great, the idea isn't then we just send out more surveys if people don't have the capability to give good feedback. So are we upskilling people or giving them the tools to say, this is how I frame a piece of feedback so it's useful? So I guess there's also this angle of within a company, you can help people by giving them the tools and a process to send useful feedback. So I guess there's that sort of angle to it as well.
Yeah, it completely needs a strategy as well. It's sometimes you can collect feedback for the sake of it. People are inundated with surveys and things like that all the time. But if there's a clear like hierarchical strategy, is like why we do feedback loops and like here's what we're trying to gain or learn or improve, whether it's a process, whether it's content, whether it's internal kind of culture and feeling towards the brand, like there's got to be that goal, there's got to be that strategy, and then it kind of filters down from it in terms of how you deliver it, which teams have access, which teams have the tools, and then what the culture of response actually looks like between the two.
Yes, this problem of taking action first and strategizing later. I've definitely fallen into that trap with surveys before, where I'm so keen to collect some sort of feedback. I get the survey out, and then I try and retrofit what the strategy was, and it skews my analysis of the data. So yeah, spend more time on the strategy and the problem defining, and then act later. Don't like the enthusiasm's great, but channel it into strategy as well, I guess.
I completely empathize with that because it's someone who's like a self-proclaimed strategist as well. The amount of times I've gone, that seems like a fun idea. I'm just going to go and do that. And then you've done something like, and you're like 2 or 3 hours in, and you're like, why am I doing this again? Does this have got any? Is this anything to do with the goals I need to complete for today or the week, or have I just found something fun that I want to do, or I enjoyed building a survey for a bit? It's yeah, you've got to take a step back before
Yeah.
you jump into it. I think we're all guilty on that.
Yeah. Oh, I feel you. Yeah, I'm bad for that as well. I'm so enthusiastic about something. I'll be 2 hours into it before I go, wait a minute. Is this really what I need to be doing? And is this going to help me? And there is, I guess, value in also testing stuff before you invest too much time into it, like a minimal viable version of something. But also, yeah, that still needs strategy. You don't just, let's roll it out to 10 people and see what we get back. That still needs a degree of strategy as well. So I'm learning a lot about myself actually in this conversation and the things I'm doing wrong, I think. Another question I wanted to ask you, and we did sort of wander into this territory, but feedback can also be really useful in telling a story. A little bit to our example earlier, it might be that we want to take on board what you're saying and improve the content, but also I think a challenge sometimes in businesses is to get people to buy into our L&D efforts, whether it's the people at the top of the business or the individual employees and learners who we want to see the value in it for them. And I think collecting feedback can actually be really useful social proof for how your content or your learning or your strategy improves someone's performance, altered their career trajectory, and presenting that back to people can actually increase the level of investment and buy-in to your overall efforts and what you do, I guess.
Yeah, I kind of break this into two areas. There's two sets of stakeholders who you probably need to win over. There's the senior management and the board, whatever you want to call them, and there's also your end users, your consumers of that particular piece of content. And this is where like L&D can make big gains. Is first of all, you can this role is measurable, and there is like a way of actually saying, well, here's we've made tangible business improvements. So if you're collecting feedback regularly on your content, I would basically like, depending what your opening kind of question is, like how effective was this content? Has this content solved your problem? You can turn that into your net promoter score and use that as a champion metric to take up to senior management and go, well, we've been tracking it for 6 months. Like our net promoter score on how we, enable people, educate people, train our teams is continually going up. We're getting really good feedback responses. And where we haven't met the mark, we're getting qualitative responses as to how we can make those improvements. So in theory, we can keep building this up. I want you to measure us on that. It's not, the thing is that L&D, and I think marketing does this a lot worse than L&D, but we fall into a trap of how effective were we in our role? Let's just make more. Let's just keep making more and more content. Have we done our job? Yeah, I made 20 assets this month. I've done a great job. And you're like, okay, that's nice, but how many of them are just sitting somewhere in the portal that no one's ever been on? It's got no page views. It's not serving any purpose. So we can have more meaningful metrics which show we're having a business impact other than just production, other than just being hamsters in a wheel. So that's one audience, the senior decision makers. And the other audience is really tapping into that social proof of like, as an L&D team, can we build trust with our consumers, like the people who are consuming our content? So within those portals, within How Now as well, for example, like you can use social proof and like trust badges and go, if you've got a good volume of responses, you can say, well, actually, out of every 100 people that read this content, most people give it like 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5, and you can start to do little tricks and things like that, which again is the way we use it in marketing is to build trust, because we're competing for time and we're competing for attention.
Mm.
And there are so many other places I can go for information. If I get bored, I get stuck, and I'll just, I can lose attention. But if you can start to build trust early on with, things like social proof at the top of an article or a guide, whatever it may be, you're okay. You've got me hooked in. Like, it seems like people have a good experience doing this. I'm gonna take their word for it. E-commerce did this years ago and has done it amazingly with every product you could possibly think of on the internet. B2B and tech teams are well behind, but we can leverage it. Like, there's a way of building trust with our audiences like that.
Yeah. No, I really like that. There's a great parallel there, actually. Like you said, often people are learning outside of the company's formal L&D. So, I suppose from that angle as well, it's really important we understand what works and connect with people and do build that sense of trust, because there's a stat recently about the percentage of employees who'd paid for learning content out of their own pocket because it wasn't being satisfied internally. So the same thing is
Wow.
happening there, that yeah, if you're not satisfying the need, there is other places they can go, and time is a useful resource for people. So is effort, so is the mental capacity to have to go through a piece of content that might not help. So yeah, I think that's also another great part there, taking that as a signal of trust and understanding then what that means in the overall sense of the buy-in to what you do and people seeing value in it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's super important. I mean, we're all kind of like, they're all our colleagues and stakeholders at the end of the day. And it's just so vital to show that, like, we really care, we're building trust. Like, be proud of the content you're making as well. It's not a case of just production. It's okay, we're really proud. People get really good experiences using this content, so it's very powerful.
Yeah. So, a lovely segue into the last question I wanted to ask you, because if we know that the content is being viewed and it's getting this great score, the final piece of the puzzle to tell that story is to maybe add the personal angle to it. So, if we know that our sales team love the content we're putting out on outreach, for example, and then we see that our numbers in terms of the people we get into the funnel increase, we can then sit down with someone in the sales team and ask them, how did this piece of content help you with your outreach, and what was the story there from your personal angle? And I saw you recently posted a few clips from your podcast, which has a great name, The Sausage Factory, which I love, about not getting too stuck into things like data and dashboards. So just really wanted to get your thoughts on how we can still keep feedback quite personal. I know we need to get scale, I know we need to get numbers we can use, but adding that personal element is important too, I guess.
Yeah, that comment was born out of that was a really good conversation we had with a product manager from Skyscanner, a guy called Sam Dickey, and his whole job is to, like, how do we improve whatever platform piece of technology it is that we have. And the thing that we do, it's interesting hearing product managers say it, and I definitely do this as a marketer, but I'll log in the morning and look at a dashboard and look at lots of numbers. And if things are going up, I'm like, oh, that's nice. Or if things are going down, I'm like, oh, that's concerning. But sometimes, like, you need huge sample sizes to qualify a lot of it sometimes. And you can't just go on these visceral, like, gut reactions. And that's the thing. We waste so much time just looking at numbers and kind of making our own hypothesis and kind of feelings and gut instincts out of it. When sometimes you can really quickly get to a problem just by opening up a conversation. So, like, that's something that I'm really proud of how we've done with some of the stuff we're doing with Rockee. So if someone is rated something really low and then left a really kind of oddball comment or something, you can go, hang on a minute, like, they've got an option to, if you want to hear from the author or you want to hear back from the person who wrote this content, you can leave an email address. And you could do the same with any platform. The technology doesn't matter. There's a way of doing it. But that way you can actually open up a conversation and go, hang on, I was really interested in what you said there. You said that, I don't know, this case study that you're using for sales just isn't relevant to, I don't know, the vertical, something like that. Why? What's going on? And you can have a 10, 15-minute conversation where it's like, well, it's not hitting on the pain points of the users I'm talking to. It's not a clear enough solution, like the evidence wasn't compelling enough. And you can go, oh, okay, I completely get it. Like, we wrote this thing in silo months ago. The market's changed, the audience has changed, the environment's changed. Without you telling me, I could have sat in a dashboard for another 3 months or 6 months looking at numbers and going, that's gone up a bit today, or that's gone down a bit today. Should I be worried? And you're like, well, this is nonsense. Like, we're wasting so much of our lives guessing from numbers, when there could just be that one little golden nugget, which is, and a conversation with someone who just goes, this is why. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I can go make it better
Yeah.
now.
That's a great point because especially when you consider the breadth of content that exists on a company's blog or internally, that some of that could have been created so long ago that you've lost insight of whether it's still relevant to the problems at hand. And unless you get that person saying to you, look, I'm trying to do this thing right now and this just doesn't help, actually we should pivot it to this, like building on that compound knowledge of someone being able to say, look, this was true, but now that the way our company or our product works, given how fast the world is changing, I think that's part of it as well, to build that compound knowledge. And the right feedback mechanisms can help you build compound knowledge from your best people in your company, from people with different perspectives, different parts of the world. So it's certainly something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, there's a really funny example I got with that. It's a marketing example, but we had a client of ours who constantly held up this one blog that ranks really well for a really high value term. They were delighted with it, constantly getting high volumes of traffic, and they're like, "This is the best blog we've ever done." And it's based on numbers. It's because Google's still ranking it and saying it's good for that particular term. The feedback on it is often quite poor. It's like, well, I don't really know what this is trying to explain to me. And it's like, so on one hand, we're championing the volume of an article, and then kind of in the second hand, like, well, people didn't like it. A lot of people read it. We're championing exposure, but not quality, which is madness. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, it is an interesting kind of
Yeah.
conversation to have.
That's an interesting example of where we pick and choose our metrics. Like if we said, oh, it's getting loads of traffic, great. And then if we found out that actually the feedback wasn't that great, we would lean into the metric being the number of views or the ranking because it's the I read about this thing recently, the self-serving bias. If it works, you're a genius. If it failed, something else is to blame. And the same thing happens with metrics, I think. If it worked, this metric's great, let's just stick with that. But once you dig under the hood a little bit and you go, oh, actually, it does still rank well, or it's being found, but no one who finds it useful. So I think we can sometimes, and it comes back to that point of having a strategy that allows you to be more objective. But yeah, I can easily fall into that trap as well. Like I'll pick the metric that makes me feel good rather than the one that contributes to my
Pick the
strategy.
metric that I want to share with senior management. And
Yeah.
like, look, my traffic volume, I've done a great blog.
Yeah, very selective. And I like your point as well about when you look at dashboards and metrics. I get a report every Monday morning about 7. I start work about 8, and it tells me about rankings for all of the keywords we're tracking. And if it's good, if the numbers are going up, oh, fantastic! I've started the week in such a good mindset. If it's decreased, and there's fluctuations anyway, so I shouldn't be surprised. But it can get you in this mindset. So I think as well, give yourself a bit of credit and space for like when you look at metrics and a bigger picture view of metrics as well, rather than sort of week to week stuff, I guess.
Nice.
Perfect. Matt, that is everything I wanted to ask you. I really feel like we gave people some great tangible stuff on how they can collect useful feedback, building a better feedback culture. So massive thank you for joining me. I'll put your links to your LinkedIn profile, rockee.io, and any other useful stuff like the Sausage Factory in the description of this episode. But other than that, just a massive thank you, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
A pleasure. Yeah. Hopefully your audience enjoyed it, and thanks so much for having me on. Really enjoyed it.